Ever heard of someone being killed by a falling coconut? Or a man who died laughing? Literally, from bizarre accidents to downright unbelievable demises, we're diving into the strangest and most unusual ways people have met their end. Buckle up for an hour of jaw-dropping stories that prove truth is stranger than fiction. This is 1 hour of people who died in extremely unusual ways. It was April 28, 2013 in Darjeeling, India. Shailendra Nath Roy, a 49-year-old police driver known for his daring stunts, was about to attempt another record-breaking feat. This time he aimed across the Teesta River, using a zip wire attached only to his hair. Shailendra already held the Guinness World Record for the farthest distance traveled on a zip wire using hair, but he was determined to push his limits even further. Hundreds of spectators gathered on the Coronation Bridge, nearly 10,000 feet above sea level, to witness this daring attempt. Shailendra was no stranger to stunts that left people in awe. Just last year, he had dragged a 42-ton train for 2.5 meters with his hair and traveled 270 feet on a zip wire, again using his hair. His impressive feats had earned him recognition and admiration, but today would prove to be tragically different. As Shailendra prepared for the stunt, he attached his shoulder-length hair to a pulley on the zip wire. He was wearing a life jacket over his shirt and carried the Indian flag, symbolizing his pride and dedication. The zip wire stretched 180 meters across the turbulent Teesta River, and Shailendra started his journey confidently. He had completed about half the distance when suddenly, disaster struck. His ponytail became entangled in the wheeler of the zip wire, leaving him stuck in mid-air. Shailendra tried desperately to free himself, using his hands to continue moving forward, but the more he struggled, the more entangled his hair became. Onlookers initially cheered, unaware of the dire situation unfolding before their eyes. For about 25 minutes, Shailendra hung in mid-air battling to free himself. The crowd's cheers slowly turned to gasps of horror as they realized something was terribly wrong. Shailendra's movements grew weaker, and he became motionless after about 20 minutes. The lack of an ambulance or a doctor on site meant that immediate medical help was unavailable. Local media reported that Shailendra suffered a major cardiac arrest, likely caused by a nervous breakdown from the prolonged suspension. Rescuers finally brought him down after approximately 45 minutes, but it was too late. Shailendra was rushed to a nearby hospital in Siliguri, 450 kilometers away, but he was declared dead on arrival. Witnesses described the scene as chaotic and heartbreaking. Balai Sutradhar, a photographer covering the stunt, recalled, "He was desperately trying to move forward. He was trying to scream out some instruction, but no one could follow what he was saying. After struggling for 30 minutes, he became still." Shailendra's family, including his wife and 2 sons, were present, watching in helpless despair. Shailendra's brother Binoy, who witnessed his brother's stunt for the first time, expressed the family's grief. "We were proud of his bravery. He was sure to win, but destiny has taken his life and the most beloved member of our family as well." Friends and colleagues mourned the loss of a man who had inspired many with his daring feats. Authorities later revealed that Shailendra had not obtained the necessary permission for the stunt. Siliguri Police Commissioner K. Jairaman stated that Roy was not on duty at the time of his death. This oversight raised questions about the safety measures and protocols in place for such dangerous stunts. Shailendra's passion for breaking records and pushing human limits was undeniable. He had achieved several Guinness World Records, including pulling vehicles with his hair and traveling long distances on zip wires. His dedication was evident, but it also showed the inherent dangers of extreme stunts. In the aftermath of Shailendra's tragic death, the incident sparked discussions about the risks involved in such performances and the importance of safety precautions. The absence of medical personnel and the lack of official permission underscored the need for stricter regulations and oversight. It was April 11, 1996 in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Jessica DeBroff, a 7-year-old girl from Falmouth, Massachusetts, was attempting to set a record as the youngest pilot to fly across the United States. She was accompanied by her father, 57-year-old Lloyd DeBroff, and Joe Reed, a 52-year-old part-time flight instructor and full-time stockbroker. They were in a Cessna 177B, embarking on a journey they called the Sea to Shining Sea flight, an ambitious 6,900-mile trip from coast to coast. Jessica's journey began on April 10th, departing from Half Moon Bay, California. They planned to reach the East Coast within 8 days, making numerous stops for media interviews. Lloyd Dubroff, who acted as the publicist, created a packed itinerary filled with early morning interviews and long flight hours. The family had received significant media attention, and Jessica's story was captivating the nation. She was often seen in videos sitting on a booster seat in the cockpit, using rudder extensions with both hands on the yoke, guided by Reed's instructions. Jessica's father, Lloyd, was the driving force behind this endeavor. Despite not having a pilot certificate, he planned the route and managed the media engagements. He aimed to make Jessica a national sensation, handing out Sea to Shining Sea baseball caps and recording the journey for ABC News. However, the flight was overloaded, and Lloyd's ambitious schedule left little room for rest. On the morning of April 11th, the weather in Cheyenne was deteriorating. A thunderstorm was approaching, bringing heavy rain, gusting winds, and hail. Reed, despite his fatigue from the previous days, decided to press on to stay on schedule for media commitments. The aircraft, already overloaded, faced additional challenges from the high-density altitude of Cheyenne, approximately 6,670 feet. Reed had logged 1,484 flight hours, mostly along the California coast, with limited experience in high-altitude flying. Jessica had about 33 hours of flight instruction with Reed, but the idea of her being the sole pilot was more of a publicity stunt than reality. Even before the crash, the Federal Aviation Administration and Guinness Book of Records had expressed concerns about promoting unsafe flying in pursuit of records. Witnesses at Cheyenne Regional Airport saw the Cessna struggle to gain altitude after taking off from runway 30. The aircraft barely climbed above 400 feet and then began to turn right. Moments later, it plunged nose first into a residential street, about 9,600 feet from the runway's end. The impact was severe, and all three occupants were killed instantly. The crash site was a horrific scene. The nose section and forward cabin were crushed, and the fuel from the wings spilled out, though there was no fire. The NTSB investigation revealed that Reed had been at the controls during the crash, and the plane had been flying in challenging conditions: strong winds, rain, hail, and low visibility. The aftermath of the crash led to significant public outcry and legislative changes. Former President Clinton signed the Child Pilot Safety Act, which prohibited unlicensed individuals from attempting to set records or engage in aeronautical competitions. This law aimed to prevent similar tragedies by ensuring that only qualified pilots could operate aircraft in such contexts. It was October 4, 2009, a Sunday, and Kellyanne Waltz was getting ready to clean Teddy's cage. Kellyanne had cleaned the cage thousands of times before, and she thought nothing of it despite the fact that Teddy was far from your ordinary pet. He was a bear. Little did Kellyanne know Teddy wasn't his usual self that day. Instead, he was more of an apex predator than a pet, and Kellyanne was just about to find out what that meant. Kellyanne Waltz, who was originally from Massachusetts, was a 37-year-old mother of two. The woman had always harbored a deep affection for animals. She even bred Old English bulldogs. After moving to Ross Township, Pennsylvania with her husband, Michael Waltz, she became a trusted and important member of the community. She was a quiet and caring woman, well known and respected in her community. But the Waltz family weren't like their peers. They had a special interest that differentiated them. As such, when they moved to Ross Township, they acquired an 8-acre property on Dogwood. It was the area's natural beauty that first caught their attention because they knew the place would suit their needs. When they moved, the Waltzes brought their pets along, a variety of exotic animals. As a result, their house was a true menagerie that included lions, tigers, cougars, leopards, servals, Old English bulldogs, reptiles, and a black bear named Teddy, which the Waltzes had bought in 2000. Everyone in the community knew about the animals. Some feared them, especially those with young children, but others saw the animals as a local curiosity and a source of fascination. Over the years, the family's neighbors would bring the children to Kellyanne and Michael's house, and they would visit the animals under Kellyanne's supervision. The animals were kept in secure, sturdy outdoor cages, and Kellyanne dedicated herself to their care. Over the years, as the animals aged and passed away, the menagerie dwindled until only the mountain lion, the tiger, and the bear, Teddy, remained. It was a quiet Sunday when Kellyanne Waltz entered the 15 by 15-foot steel and concrete cage of Teddy to clean it. Teddy was a 350-pound bear, a creature that some would argue needed to be free. Before entering the cage, Kellyanne attempted to distract the bear by throwing dog food to one side of the enclosure. This was her usual trick, and it worked every time like a charm. Except this time it didn't. Something went tragically wrong. Teddy, frustrated and possibly influenced by the onset of hibernation instincts, turned on Kellyanne and attacked her. Kellyanne's young children saw the whole thing. Terrified, they ran to their neighbor Scott Castone's house for help. Scott, who was a school teacher, initially thought Kellyanne was being attacked by a wild bear. But then, when he realized it was Teddy, Scott rushed to the Waltz property with his .357 caliber handgun. He found Teddy on top of Kellyanne, who seemed unconscious. When Teddy noticed Scott, he began moving toward the man. Scott couldn't take any chances. He was a father and he valued his life. As such, he shot the bear in the head, killing it instantly. Scott then rushed to Kellyanne's side. She was unconscious and badly hurt. He called 911, but nothing could be done for Kellyanne. She was declared dead at the scene. The incident has left the community in shock, transforming what was once a place of wonder into one of mourning. After the incident, it was revealed that Michael Waltz's permits for keeping, selling, and displaying exotic animals had expired in June 2008, more than a year before the incident. However, the lapse was considered a minor violation and did not warrant the removal of the animals. Inspections in 2007 had not revealed any issues, and the cages were deemed secure. Kellyanne Waltz's funeral service, held at New Covenant World Outreach Church, drew a large crowd of mourners, reflecting the profound impact she had on those around her. Friends and neighbors remembered her as a devoted mother, a passionate animal lover, and a cherished member of the community. Tim Conway from the Pennsylvania Game Commission criticized the decision to enter the cage with a wild animal, emphasizing that such animals are not domesticated and can be unpredictable. It was July 17, 2006, in a serene neighborhood of Salem Township, Pennsylvania. That day, Sandra L. Piovesan, a 50-year-old woman who had a pack of 9 wolf-dog hybrids, entered the animal's caged enclosure. She loved the animals dearly, but the hybrids hadn't been their usual selves for the past year or so. They were restless, more aggressive. They had even killed one of the pack's older members. Unbeknownst to her, Sandra was in danger, the next target of an increasingly agitated pack. At that point, Sandra Piovesan had been keeping wolf-dog hybrids for about a decade. They are unusual animals, crossbreeds between domestic dogs and wolves. These animals often exhibit characteristics from both species, which means they inherit the natural aggression of wolves. While hybrids can sometimes be domesticated, they retain a significant amount of wild instincts, making them unpredictable and potentially dangerous. As such, experts generally advise against keeping wolf-dog hybrids as pets because they pose a serious risk to humans who can't always predict their behaviors and needs. Packs are even more dangerous, since each animal can and probably will fight for dominance. But what happens when the dominant figure is a human? Sandra was about to find out. The woman housed these hybrids in a large caged enclosure in her backyard, providing them with various toys and play structures, including a replica igloo, balls, and a plastic playhouse. The animals, some weighing between 70 to 100 pounds and aged 7 to 8 years, had never been spayed or neutered, leading to several litters of puppies over the years. Despite previous warnings from humane officers, Piovesan continued to keep and breed the hybrids, seemingly unaware of the impending danger. She loved the animals with all her heart, but she did not possess the necessary license from the Pennsylvania Game Commission to own these animals. Instead, she circumvented this requirement by obtaining state dog licenses. According to some of her friends, Sandra's passion for these animals stemmed from her claimed Native American heritage. But not everybody loved these animals the way she did. Instead, Sandra's neighbors were concerned and irritated by the presence of the hybrids. Sandra would sometimes feed roadkill to the pack, and the smell was more than unpleasant. Even more, rumor had it that the animals were unvaccinated against rabies and unneutered. To top things off, the animals seemed stressed and restless. Piovesan's dedication to her wolf dogs was evident to those who knew her. She often entered the pen to feed them, and even invited visitors to observe the animals, treating them as beloved pets. However, her supervisor, Connie Griswold, and others close to her were unaware of the true nature of these animals until her untimely death. On the morning of July 17, 2006, Sandra was supposed to meet her daughter, Crystal, for breakfast. When she failed to do so, Crystal visited Sandra's home, only to discover Sandra's lifeless body within the enclosure. It was a gruesome scene. It appeared that Sandra had suffered extensive injuries from bites and claws and serious blood loss, which ultimately led to her death. When state police officers arrived at the scene, they noticed the wolf dogs were visibly agitated by their presence, moving in unison along the fence line of their enclosure, as if they wanted to attack. Given the potential danger, authorities decided to tranquilize and then euthanize all the animals to safely retrieve Piovesan's body. The autopsy, conducted by Dr. Cyril H. Wecht, confirmed that Sandra had died from the injuries inflicted by her pets. For the most part, those who knew Sandra were saddened by her death, but not shocked. Some of her friends had warned her about the potential risks. One of Sandra's closest friends, Brian Gallagher, speculated that the attack might have been triggered by a struggle for dominance within the pack, with one animal or more attempting to assert leadership over Sandra. The incident has underscored the critical need for stricter regulations and greater public awareness regarding the ownership of wolf-dog hybrids and other exotic animals. On September 26, 2012, Terry Vance Garner, a 69-year-old farmer from Oregon, went out to feed his many hogs, something he did multiple times a day. This time around, though, Terry failed to return home. When his family went looking for him, they were met with a gruesome sight, right in the middle of the animals. Terry Vance Garner was a well-known figure in his community, described by his older brother Michael as a good-hearted guy. Terry was a Vietnam War veteran. His time during the war left him with deep psychological scars. Terry suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. He found solace in his farm and his animals, which were like a therapeutic sanctuary for him. Overall, the animals and the farm were his life, providing him with a sense of purpose and peace. Garner's dedication to his farm and animals was evident in his daily routine and interactions with the livestock. Despite an incident where a hog had bitten him after he accidentally stepped on a piglet, Garner chose to spare the animal, proving his compassionate nature. Domestic hogs are not as aggressive as their feral counterparts, but they too can pose significant dangers under certain circumstances. They have powerful jaws with strong teeth and are omnivorous, which means they can and will eat meat. Large adult hogs, such as those on Garner's farm, can weigh up to 700 pounds or more. Their sheer size and strength can make them dangerous, especially if they feel threatened or agitated. On the fateful day, Garner went out to feed his hogs but did not return. Hours later, a family member discovered his dentures and fragments of his body in the hog enclosure. They had to assume the rest of Terry's remains had been consumed by the hogs. Many of Terry's hogs were indeed huge, and it wasn't hard to imagine them inflicting serious injuries or even death to an unlucky person. Authorities were called upon the gruesome discovery, and an investigation was launched. The circumstances were, however, strange enough to make the investigation difficult. Coos County District Attorney Paul Frazier indicated that Terry might have suffered a medical emergency, such as a heart attack, which could have caused him to fall, making him vulnerable to the hogs. The alternative was sinister, something out of a horror movie. Terry could have been intentionally knocked over by the animals, leading to the fatal attack. Given the unusual nature of the case, foul play was not ruled out, although there was no direct evidence pointing to it. A pathologist was unable to determine the precise cause or manner of death, prompting further analysis by a forensic anthropologist at the University of Oregon. But there was a lack of definitive answers. As such, Terry's family had to deal not only with the man's death, but also with the possibility that they would never find out what really happened. Garner's life and untimely death underscore the unpredictable nature of working with livestock and the need for caution and respect when interacting with large animals, domesticated or not. On April 17, 2018, Jennifer Reardon was on board Southwest Airlines Flight 1380, seated by a window as the plane cruised above Pennsylvania. She was flying from New York City to Dallas. It was a routine flight, but an unexpected and tragic turn changed everything. Jennifer Reardon, a 43-year-old from Albuquerque, was known for her dedication to her family, career, and community. As Vice President of Community Relations at Wells Fargo in Albuquerque, she managed over 1,000 employees' volunteer efforts and contributed significantly to various philanthropic causes across the Southwest. Jennifer was a respected leader, a wife, and a mother of two, and she was returning home to her family when she boarded Flight 1380 on April 17, 2018. However, about 20 minutes into the journey, the otherwise uneventful flight took a turn when a catastrophic event sent shockwaves through the cabin and marked a tragic chapter in U.S. aviation history. The trouble began when one of the plane's engine fan blades suddenly fractured. The fan blade, having endured over 32,000 flights, succumbed to metal fatigue, an issue overlooked during previous inspections. The fan blade's failure set off a disastrous chain reaction as the engine cover disintegrated, sending pieces of shrapnel flying with explosive force. Some of this debris struck the fuselage, ultimately smashing through the plexiglass window near Jennifer's seat. This breach caused a rapid decompression, sucking Jennifer partially out of the broken window. As flight attendants Rachel Fernheimer and Shanique Mallory rushed to assess the damage, they spotted Jennifer with her torso, head, and arm outside the plane, while the rest of her body remained strapped in by her lap belt. In a desperate attempt to save her, the flight attendants clung to Jennifer's legs as two nearby passengers joined in, one reaching out the window to secure her shoulder. Amid the chaotic scene, with oxygen masks deployed and smoke filling the cabin, they fought to pull Jennifer back inside. With Jennifer now inside the plane, the two flight attendants asked for medical volunteers. A paramedic and a nurse took over the rescue operation. They attempted to use a defibrillator, but it indicated there was no shock. As such, they took turns at CPR in hopes of reviving Jennifer. But Jennifer's injuries proved too extensive. The severity of the impact meant survival was nearly impossible. As the tragedy unfolded, the pilots worked to control the jet, which had sharply tilted to the left due to the explosion's impact. The entire cabin was gripped with fear as the plane descended rapidly to an altitude where passengers could breathe without the masks. The pilots skillfully guided the aircraft to an emergency landing at Philadelphia International Airport, bringing the flight's remaining 144 passengers and 5 crew members to safety. Jennifer Reardon was tragically dead, having sustained severe blunt force trauma injuries to her head, neck, and torso from both the shrapnel and the plane's fuselage. Her death marked the first fatal in-flight accident on a U.S. airline in nearly a decade. The incident prompted an in-depth investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, which focused on the failed fan blade and the safety mechanisms designed to contain such an event. The NTSB hearing revealed that the blade that fractured was last inspected in 2012, using techniques that were inadequate to detect the metal fatigue. CFM International, the engine's manufacturer, had initially considered fan blades to have no lifetime limit, believing them to be virtually indestructible. In response to the accident, CFM recommended more advanced inspection methods, including ultrasound and electrical current testing, which could more accurately detect microscopic fractures. These inspections, now mandatory, have already led to the replacement of several blades on similar engines showing signs of fatigue. In a statement, Jennifer's husband, Michael Reardon, expressed his hope that lessons from the incident would prevent future tragedies. Jennifer's colleagues and community members remembered her as a compassionate leader who inspired others to give back. In memory of Jennifer, the Reardon family founded the Jennifer Reardon Foundation, aimed at continuing her legacy of kindness and community service. It was the summer of 2011. Chris Staniforth had spent countless hours doing what he loved most, gaming. Chris was no stranger to losing himself in his favorite virtual worlds, sometimes until the early hours. That particular night, though, was different, and the following day would turn devastating. What began as a normal morning for the young gamer quickly spiraled into tragedy, and within hours, his family's lives would be changed forever. Chris, a 20-year-old from Sheffield, England, was well known to his family and friends as a dedicated gamer. He could often be found sitting in front of his Xbox, deeply engrossed in games like Halo, sometimes for up to 12 hours straight. His passion for gaming was more than just a hobby. It was also Chris's aspiration. He had recently been accepted into a game design program at Leicester University, where he hoped to turn his love of gaming into a career. His father, David Staniforth, recalled how Chris had lived for his Xbox and how his son's dream had always been to create worlds just like the ones he'd enjoyed exploring. It was that unrelenting commitment to gaming that led Chris to spend hours on end sitting at his desk, rarely taking breaks or moving around. What his family and even Chris himself were unaware of was the silent, hidden danger lurking in his prolonged inactivity. One night in 2011, Chris had likely stayed up all night, as he had many times before, absorbed in gaming. By morning, he was scheduled to visit a local job center with a friend to discuss career opportunities, a small step toward securing a future he had been working toward. However, that morning, while waiting outside the job center, he felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. His friend later recalled that Chris had been experiencing odd pains, but hadn't thought much of them. Chris then dropped a pack of gum. He bent down to pick it up and suddenly began convulsing. Panicked, his friend called for an ambulance, but despite the paramedics' immediate response, they were unable to save him. By the time he arrived at the hospital, Chris had succumbed to a condition most commonly associated with long-haul travelers: deep vein thrombosis, or DVT. A DVT occurs when a blood clot forms in a deep vein, typically in the leg, due to prolonged periods of immobility. In Chris's case, the clot had formed during his long hours of gaming, sitting still for extended periods with limited movement. Tragically, the clot eventually traveled to his lungs, resulting in a pulmonary embolism, a blockage in the main artery that delivers oxygenated blood to the lungs. It is a serious condition that, if untreated, can be fatal. For Chris, the discovery was devastatingly too late. Chris's father, David, was left to grapple with the loss of his son. David, who had always known Chris as a young man with no prior health issues, could hardly comprehend how his son's passion for gaming had led to such a tragic end. David spoke publicly about his son's case, highlighting the reality that long periods of immobility, whether during gaming, travel, or any sedentary activity, could pose serious health risks. He shared his heartbreak with the world, hoping to warn other parents and gamers about the hidden dangers of extended gaming sessions. While Chris's death could easily have been attributed to his love for gaming, David was careful not to place blame on the industry or the technology itself. Instead, he focused on raising awareness about the importance of taking breaks, moving around, and understanding the risks of sitting for extended periods. "Don't stop your child from playing games," David advised other parents. "They love doing it. It's great for them. Just be aware, enjoy it, but take a break." It was January 4th, 1967, on Coniston Water in the Lake District, England. Donald Campbell, a 45-year-old speed enthusiast, was behind the controls of his jet-engined hydroplane, Bluebird K-7. Campbell was attempting to break his own world water speed record, a feat he had accomplished 7 times before. On this clear, cold morning, the stakes were high and the pressure was intense. Campbell had faced 9 weeks of bad weather and engine failures, but today seemed promising. Bluebird K-7, a sleek, steel-framed, aluminum-bodied hydroplane, was a marvel of engineering. Designed by Ken and Lou Norris, it housed a Metropolitan Vickers barrel axial flow turbojet engine capable of producing 3,500 pounds of thrust. The boat, with its distinctive pickle fork layout, was unlike any other and had brought Campbell many successes on the water. At 8:45 a.m., with the lake's surface appearing smooth and the hills around it capped with snow, Bluebird was launched. Campbell, known for his cool demeanor, gave a thumbs up before starting his first run. Heading south, he averaged 297 miles per hour over the measured kilometer. To break the record, he needed to hit an average of 300 miles per hour on the return run. After a brief pause, Campbell began his second attempt. As Bluebird sped northward, slight ripples disturbed the water. Campbell's voice came over the radio. "She's tramping," indicating the boat was moving swiftly. Moments later, he said, "Full power," followed by, "The water is not good, I can't see much." His final words were chilling. "I am upside down," and then, "She's going." At more than 300 miles per hour, Bluebird's nose lifted, tipping the boat backward. It flipped forward 50 feet into the air, then crashed nose first into the water. A massive curtain of spray rose and then fell, and Bluebird was gone. Divers attempted to recover Campbell's body from the depths of Coniston Water, but they lacked sufficient equipment. Only some plastic buoyancy bags and the 2 sponsons were retrieved. The search for Campbell's body would resume the next day with better equipment. That evening, Tonya Byrne, Campbell's wife and a cabaret artist, arrived from London filled with grief and disbelief. Campbell had always known the risks of his high-speed pursuits. He had often said that if Bluebird's nose lifted even slightly, disaster would follow. The accident occurred just 200 yards from the end of the measured kilometer, at a speed too great for Bluebird to handle safely. Campbell's pursuit of a new record ended tragically, but he still held the record at 276.38 miles per hour, set in Australia in 1964. Donald Campbell's legacy was more than just his records. He was the son of Sir Malcolm Campbell, another speed record holder, and had spent his life chasing speed on both land and water. His journey began in 1949 when he attempted to break records using his father's boat, Bluebird K4. Despite early failures, Campbell's determination never wavered. In 1953, Campbell developed the Bluebird K7, the world's first successful jet boat. Between 1955 and 1964, he set 7 world water speed records, pushing the limits of what was possible. His 1955 record at Ullswater was the first to exceed 200 miles per hour, and his subsequent records at Coniston Water became annual highlights. Campbell's ambition also led him to attempt the land speed record in Australia, where he faced numerous challenges, but achieved a new record in 1964. Throughout his career, Bluebird K7 underwent many modifications to improve stability and speed, reflecting Campbell's relentless pursuit of perfection. After the tragic crash in 1967, Bluebird K7 lay submerged in Coniston Water for decades. In 2001, the wreckage and Campbell's body were finally recovered. The hydroplane underwent a careful restoration by Tyneside engineer Bill Smith, sparking a lengthy legal battle over its ownership. In 2018, Bluebird K7 returned to the water in Scotland, reaching speeds of 150 miles per hour. Thousands of spectators, including Campbell's daughter Gina, watched as the restored craft took to the water once more. The emotional event marked a significant milestone in the hydroplane's journey. The Ruskin Museum in Coniston now houses Bluebird K7, and plans are underway to run the boat on Coniston Water again. The museum, which built a special wing for Bluebird, aims to honor Campbell's legacy and his connection to the local community. It was August 27, 2019, in Oregon's Alvord Desert. Jessie Combs, a 39-year-old American jet car speed racer, known by fans as the fastest woman on 4 wheels, was attempting to break a land speed record. Jessie had always been passionate about speed and pushing the limits. On this day, she was determined to make history by surpassing the record set by Kitty O'Neill in 1976. But this attempt would be her last. Jessie was a prominent figure in the niche sport of jet car racing. Her dream was to become the fastest woman on Earth, a goal she had been chasing since 2012. She was already the fastest woman on 4 wheels, having set a record of 641 kilometers per hour in 2013. However, mechanical problems had prevented her from achieving official recognition for faster runs. On this day, Jessie aimed to break the 823 kilometer per hour record set by O'Neill. She woke up to an alarm that declared, "Let's make history," and headed to the dry lake bed in Oregon's Alvord Desert with her team. Jessie was part of the North American Eagle, or NAE, project, an ambitious endeavor. The team had converted a Lockheed F-104 Starfighter jet plane into a car, capable of incredible speeds, thanks to its 52,000 horsepower jet engine. Jessie's boyfriend and teammate, Terry Madden, was with her. He documented the day with photos and videos, capturing Jessie's excitement and determination. Despite several successful runs earlier, Jessie had voiced concerns about safety. She and Madden had planned to go to a house in Lake Tahoe the next night, but she decided to make one last afternoon run to back up her record and then walk away from it for good. As Jessie made her final run, the car reached an incredible speed of 841.338 kilometers per hour, surpassing the previous record. However, tragedy struck when the front wheel assembly failed. As Jessie decelerated just past the end of the run, the assembly came apart, and debris entered the electronics and mechanical bay behind her, causing a catastrophic crash. Jessie was pronounced dead at the scene. The exact details of the crash were still unknown, but the Harney County Sheriff's Office confirmed her death. Terry Madden was the first to arrive at the scene. He later shared his grief on Instagram, revealing that they had done everything possible to save her. Jessie Combs' death was a significant loss to the racing community. She was known not only for her racing achievements but also for her work as a metal fabricator and television personality. She had appeared on shows like Extreme 4x4, Overhaulin', and Mythbusters. Her enthusiastic personality, bright smile, and relentless pursuit of her dreams inspired many, especially young girls and women. In the days following her death, tributes poured in from fans, friends, and colleagues. Her family released a statement, remembering her bright smile, positivity, and tenacious pursuit of the fulfillment of her dreams. They emphasized how she lived fearlessly and left an impact on everyone who knew her. Jessie's goal to become the fastest woman on Earth was recognized by Guinness World Records after her passing. They updated their website, acknowledging her new mark of 841.338 kilometers per hour. Jessie became the first person to break the record in over 40 years. Madden's tribute to Jessie was heartfelt. He posted a collage of photos and videos of their time together, expressing how proud he was of her. He mentioned that despite the pain of losing her, he would continue to honor her legacy and do good with her memory. It was April 3, 2014 in Eloy, Arizona, about 65 miles south of Phoenix. The desert sky was clear with perfect weather for skydiving. On this day, a group of 222 skydivers from 28 different countries gathered at Skydive Arizona, one of the most renowned skydiving facilities in the United States. They had one goal: to break the world record for the largest number of people completing 2 aerial formations before deploying their parachutes. Among these skydivers was Diana Paris, a 46-year-old experienced skydiver from Berlin, Germany. Diana had completed 1,500 jumps over her career, making her an experienced veteran in the skydiving community. She was part of an elite group known as the World Team, which had been preparing for this record-breaking attempt for the past 18 months. The plan was simple, yet incredibly complex. Jump from 18,000 feet, form a shape in the sky, break apart, form another shape, and then deploy their parachutes. As the clock struck 7:30 a.m., the skydivers were ready. They wore colorful jumpsuits and oxygen masks, necessary for the high-altitude jump. The adrenaline was intense as they boarded the planes, each one carrying a group of skydivers. The aircraft climbed higher and higher, reaching the designated altitude. The jump was about to begin. The signal was given, and one by one the skydivers leaped out of the planes. Diana Paris was among them. The skydivers spread out, accelerating to speeds of over 100 miles per hour as they began their free fall. The first formation came together smoothly, a kaleidoscope of colors in the sky. The precision and skill required for such a feat were immense, but these were experienced professionals. Then it was time for the second formation. The skydivers separated briefly before coming together again. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until disaster struck. Diana's main parachute failed to deploy properly. In skydiving, every second counts. There is a narrow window of time to release the main parachute, and if it fails, to deploy the reserve parachute. For Diana, this window closed too quickly. Her malfunctioning parachute was released too low to the ground, not allowing enough time for the reserve parachute to fully open. Diana plummeted toward the ground. Despite the best efforts of the emergency procedures, there was nothing that could be done. At 7:42 a.m., authorities responded to a call about a skydiving accident. Diana Paris was declared dead at the scene. The news spread quickly among the skydiving community. Skydive Arizona issued a statement confirming the tragic accident. The malfunctioning parachute was released too low to allow the reserve parachute to fully open, the statement read. It was clear that the accident had nothing to do with the size of the group or the weather conditions. The equipment had failed at the worst possible moment. Diana's husband, who was present at the event, was devastated. He told the police that Diana was an experienced skydiver, well-versed in the risks and safety measures of the sport. This wasn't her first jump, and it certainly wasn't her first group formation attempt. The fact that such an experienced skydiver could fall victim to a malfunctioning parachute shows a lot about the risks involved in skydiving. The World Team, despite their grief, decided to honor Diana's memory in the best way they knew how, by continuing their mission to break the world record. They held a meeting, filled with tears and hugs, and agreed to proceed with the record attempt. However, they would do so with one significant change. Instead of a 222-way formation, it would now be a 221-way formation. with Diana's slot left open in her honor. This missing man formation was a tribute to their fallen friend, a way to keep her spirit alive in the skies she loved so much. On the day of the special jump, the atmosphere was heavy with emotion. Skydivers gathered, many of them friends and colleagues of Diana. They knew the risks, but they also knew the passion that drove them to jump out of planes and defy gravity. They took to the skies once more, their hearts heavy but their determination strong. The formation came together beautifully with the empty slot. The investigation into the accident was thorough. The Eloy Police Department and the Federal Aviation Administration looked into the malfunctioning parachute. They wanted to understand what had gone wrong and how it could be prevented in the future. The results of the investigation confirmed what was already suspected. The malfunction was an unfortunate mishap, unrelated to any external factors like the weather or the aircraft. It was a reminder that even the most experienced skydivers are at the mercy of their equipment. It was March 5, 2019, in the quiet village of Zdekov, located in eastern Czech Republic. Michael Prysek, a 34-year-old local resident, entered his pet lion's enclosure for unknown reasons. But he never made it out of the cage, at least not alive, marking a grim end to his hobby of breeding dangerous predators in his backyard. But what happened? Michal Prysek was well known in his village for his unconventional choice of pets. It's safe to say that his passion made him unpopular. Locals feared his animals, but Michal was hell-bent on having his way and keeping his beloved exotic pets, a lion and a lioness. He had purchased the male lion 3 years prior from Slovakia. The lioness was acquired 2 years after that, in 2018. Michal kept these lions in homemade cages on his property, apparently for breeding purposes. Despite numerous complaints from concerned neighbors and fines from local authorities for lacking the necessary permits and building permissions, Michal continued to keep and breed these dangerous animals. To top things off, he would often take the lions out on walks in his neighborhood. As such, incidents involving the lions were not uncommon. In June 2018, the community was further enraged when a cyclist collided with Prysek's lioness while he was taking her for a walk on a leash. The cyclist was injured and required hospital treatment. But the incident was classified as a traffic accident after police intervention. It didn't matter to Michal that his whole community wanted him to give up his pets, and there was little that authorities could do about the matter. They had previously fined Prysek for illegal breeding and constructing enclosures without proper permits, but their efforts to remove the animals legally were hampered by a lack of alternative facilities for the lions and the absence of evidence suggesting animal cruelty. As such, the situation was at a stalemate because Michal refused access to his property and the authorities were unable to take further action under existing laws. But it all changed on a fateful Tuesday morning. The maintenance of lions in captivity, especially in non-professional settings, is a huge risk, something Michal learned in the worst possible way. It was about 7 a.m. when Michal Prysek's father discovered his son's lifeless body inside the male lion's cage. But what happened? It appeared that the cage was locked from the inside. This meant that 34-year-old Michal had voluntarily entered and then found himself trapped. Michal's father alerted the authorities. When the police arrived, however, they were faced with a serious matter. In order to reach and recover Michal's lifeless body, they needed to face the predators. And while lions are part of the big cat family, they are far from their domesticated cousins. Lions are large carnivores. They are known for their strength and their hunting prowess. They are apex predators, meaning they are at the top of the food chain. As such, unarmed humans pose little threat to these powerful animals. To ensure the safety of the responders and to access the victim, the police made the difficult decision to shoot both lions. A police spokesperson later stated that the action was absolutely necessary. Prysek's death was officially pronounced by a doctor who arrived at the scene shortly after the police. His body was then sent for an autopsy to confirm the exact cause of death. As it turned out, the lioness was pregnant at the time, adding a further layer of tragedy to the incident. Despite the tragedy, some in the village were able to breathe more easily after the incident. Zdekov Mayor Tomas Kokurek remarked that this tragic incident might finally bring about a resolution to the long-standing issue. As a result of Michal's death, the Czech government then indicated that it was considering changes to the laws regulating the ownership and breeding of predatory animals in order to prevent similar situations in the future. At least at the time, The Czech Republic was a hub for illegal wildlife smuggling. On August 25, 2017, 31-year-old snake enthusiast Dan Brandon was in his bedroom in his Church Crookham, Hampshire home. Downstairs, his parents were cooking dinner. Dan was enjoying some time with his beloved pets, 10 snakes and 12 tarantulas. But then something happened. His parents heard a mighty crash, and Dan failed to answer their calls. When they opened his bedroom door, they were met with a horrifying sight. But what had happened? And could it have been prevented? Dan Brandon was known for his love of exotic animals, owning 10 snakes and 12 tarantulas. He had been keeping reptiles since he was 15 years old, so for 16 years. Dan was an experienced handler who knew the needs of each and every one of his pets. He loved his pets, but he had a particular bond with Tiny, an African rock python he had raised since it was small enough to fit in the palm of his hand. African rock pythons are among the largest snake species, known for their immense strength and occasional temperamental nature. They are non-venomous constrictors that kill their prey by coiling around and suffocating it. While they can become familiar with their handlers, they do not exhibit affection in the same way domestic pets do. These snakes are driven by instinct, which can sometimes lead to dangerous interactions with humans. Dan would often refer to Tiny as his baby, despite the fact that she was an 8-foot snake. Tiny's size and strength made her more unpredictable compared to his other pets. Despite occasional aggressive behaviors like hissing and pretending to strike, Brandon never felt threatened by Tiny. In recent times, however, he had stopped putting Tiny around his neck. Despite his experience and careful handling, his passion for these animals led to a tragic accident. It was the evening of August 25, 2017, and Babs Brandon, Dan's mother, was cooking dinner. Suddenly, she heard a crash from her son's bedroom, but assumed Derek had knocked something over. At about 7:15 that evening, Babs shouted that dinner was ready, but Dan didn't come down. Babs sent her husband Derek to check on Dan. Once again, he didn't answer. Upon entering her son's room, Babs found Dan lying face down on the floor. He was a little cold to the touch. Babs quickly assessed the room and noticed something. Tiny, Dan's African rock python, was missing from her vivarium. Paramedics were called but were unable to save Dan. Tiny was later found coiled up and hidden under a box in the room. Dan's parents were shocked and looking for answers. An inquest later revealed that Dan had died of asphyxiation, with pathologist Dr. Adnan al-Badri noting a hemorrhage behind one eye, burst blood vessels, and congested lungs. There were no bite marks or puncture wounds on Dan's body, nor specific signs on his neck muscles, indicating that the death was not due to aggression. Coroner Andrew Bradley concluded that Tiny had likely coiled around Dan either out of engagement or as a reaction to feeling scared, leading to accidental asphyxiation. Professor John Cooper, a reptile expert, confirmed that Dan was an experienced handler who would have known how to unwrap a python. Cooper examined Tiny and noted no scratches on the shed skin that would indicate a struggle, reinforcing the theory that the incident was not aggressive but rather a tragic misadventure. He emphasized that while African rock pythons can recognize their handlers, their actions are not based on affection but on instinctual responses. The tragedy highlighted the inherent risks of keeping large constrictor snakes as pets. Despite Dan's experience and care, the unpredictable nature of such animals can lead to fatal consequences. Dan's family sought answers to their questions, but the exact circumstances leading to Dan's death may never be fully understood, especially since some experts doubted that Tiny was responsible for her owner's death, especially considering that evidence was indeed limited. In November 2018, Elena Struthers Gardner was at home in Dorset, England, preparing to have a drink. It was a quiet evening, but what followed next was a tragic accident involving a seemingly harmless household item. Elena, known as Lena to those close to her, was 60 years old and lived in Broadstone, Dorset, England. Over the years, the woman had come to know both success and struggle. Once an accomplished equestrian, she had dedicated much of her youth to the competitive equestrian world. She had trained in eventing, show jumping, and dressage, and even worked with national hunt horses in Newbury, Berkshire. She had a promising career ahead of her. However, her dreams were shattered by a devastating accident at the age of 21, when a riding mishap left her with severe spinal injuries. This traumatic event marked the beginning of a long battle with chronic pain and mobility issues. Following her accident, Elena endured multiple fractures to her lumbar spine, leading to scoliosis and intense, constant pain. Her mobility became compromised, and she was frequently prone to sudden collapses, described by her wife Mandy Struthers Gardner as falling like a sack of potatoes. The years of pain management had taken a toll on her, and she required high doses of fentanyl to cope. As her medication levels were later reduced, she developed a dependency on alcohol. By the time of her death, she was reportedly drinking around half a liter of vodka daily, often mixed with orange juice in a mason jar with a screw-top lid, a habit that led to the fatal incident. On November 22, 2018, Elena was in her kitchen, holding a mason jar-style glass equipped with a metal straw. Suddenly, Elena collapsed, and the 10-inch stainless steel straw fixed in place by the screw-top lid became a lethal weapon. The metal straw entered Elena's left eye socket and pierced her brain. Her wife Mandy, who was home at the time, did not hear the fall but found Elena shortly afterward. Lying face down, Elena was making unusual, gurgling sounds, and Mandy, noticing the straw protruding from her head, immediately called for an ambulance. Paramedics rushed her to Southampton General Hospital, but the severity of her injuries left little hope for recovery. Specialists informed Mandy that Elena's injuries were too severe, and the following day, her life support was turned off. Forensic examination of the incident was thorough. Dr. David Parham, who conducted the post-mortem, confirmed that the straw had entered through Elena's left eyelid and pierced her brainstem, a critical area responsible for functions such as breathing. The investigation into Elena's death highlighted the rare but significant dangers associated with metal drinking straws. Assistant Coroner Brendan Allen issued a warning, emphasizing the risks of using fixed metal straws in rigid lids. With no give or flexibility, the metal straw could not move upon impact, resulting in catastrophic injuries. Great care should be taken when using these metal straws, Allen stated, stressing that they should never be fixed in place by lids or similar devices. Had the lid not held the straw stationary, it likely would have dislodged rather than impaled her eye. However, there wasn't sufficient evidence to explain how Elena came to fall. There was no alcohol in her system at the moment of the accident, nor could the assistant coroner conclude that any reduction in fentanyl could have caused Lena's fall. The aftermath of Elena's death left her wife and loved ones grappling with shock and grief. Mandy spoke of the profound loss, describing Elena as someone taken far too early. In her grief, Mandy has expressed her hope that others would heed the tragic lesson in Elena's story. She remarked on the dangers of these straws, particularly for individuals with mobility issues or young children. It was June 8, 2014. Grant Adams' Sunday morning began like any other, with the 17-year-old just waking up at his home in South Shields. But within moments, what should have been an ordinary day took a dramatic and tragic turn, leaving his family and community in shock. Grant was more than just a teenager. He was a soon-to-be father, anticipating the arrival of his daughter with his girlfriend, Shauna Gardner, age 16, who was 7 months pregnant. He had already picked a name for his little girl, Rakia. Grant's life, though young, was filled with hopes and dreams for the future. He had recently purchased his first car and was taking driving lessons. His 18th birthday was approaching, and with it, the promise of a new chapter. Grant's family included his mother, 37-year-old Amanda Smedley, who he shared his home with, and his sister, 20-year-old Natasha, who had a young daughter herself. The tragedy that struck their family happened swiftly. Early on that quiet Sunday, Grant had just stepped out of bed when he tripped over a wire in his third-floor bedroom. In a tragic stroke of fate, he lost his balance and fell onto a freestanding sunbed his mother had been storing in his room. The impact was catastrophic. One of the glass UV tubes shattered, and a sharp fragment pierced his jugular vein in 2 places. Disoriented and gravely injured, Grant attempted to pull the glass shard from his neck in shock, further aggravating the injury, and made his way toward the stairs in a desperate attempt to find help. However, the injury proved too severe, and he collapsed at the bottom of the stairs, where his mother soon found him in a pool of blood. Amanda, his mother, heard the thuds from upstairs and immediately rushed to her son, only to find him bleeding heavily. Panicked, She called for help, and her partner attempted to stem the bleeding until paramedics arrived. Emergency services, including the Great North Air Ambulance, responded rapidly, arriving within minutes to treat Grant at the scene at about 9 a.m. that Sunday morning. He was airlifted to Newcastle's Royal Victoria Infirmary in critical condition, but the damage was too extensive. Despite the efforts of medical professionals, Grant succumbed to his injuries on June 9, 2014. The sudden tragic loss left Grant's family and friends devastated. For his girlfriend Shauna, the shock was unimaginable. She shared her sorrow publicly, expressing her love and the bittersweet comfort of carrying a part of him with her in the form of their unborn child. Grant's sister Natasha, who had always been close to him, described how eagerly he looked forward to becoming a father despite initial nerves. The family now sees Shauna and baby Rukia as the remaining pieces of Grant's legacy, clinging to them as a reminder of the vibrant young man they lost. Friends and members of the South Shields community were stunned by the news, struggling to comprehend how such an unusual and heartbreaking accident could claim the life of a promising young man on the brink of adulthood. Grant had always been known as a lively, active teenager who loved boxing and cherished time spent with friends and family. His sister Natasha shared how her brother had weathered numerous accidents before, including motorbike spills and other typical teenage incidents, and that it seemed unthinkable that something as unexpected as a fall onto a sunbed could prove fatal. Grant's organs were donated in the wake of his passing. His family took solace in knowing that his final act would be to help others, even as they wrestled with the magnitude of their loss. "It would have been what Grant would have wanted," Natasha said. "There are people waiting for transplants, and hopefully Grant's organs will help someone else. We don't want any other family to have to go through what we've gone through." Late one evening in 2020, while attempting to disperse an illegal cockfight in his homeland, the Philippines, Lieutenant Christian Bolak found himself facing an unexpected danger. As he reached out to confiscate one of the roosters, a single fatal move changed everything. In the Philippines, cockfighting, or tupada, holds a deep-rooted cultural place, traditionally tied to gatherings and celebrations. However, these fights also involve significant risks, not only to the birds but also to human participants. A steel blade, known as a gaff, is often strapped to a rooster's leg to maximize damage during a fight. Despite the thrill and tradition associated with cockfights, in 2020 these events were made illegal, especially since the COVID pandemic led authorities to ban gatherings. Despite the ban, underground cockfights continued, and in October 2020, Lieutenant Bolak and his team were enforcing restrictions as they responded to reports of an illegal gathering in the village of Madugang, northern Samar. Christian, in his mid-30s and dedicated to upholding the law, led the San Jose police force with unwavering commitment. That evening, he joined his team to break up an illicit cockfight in the hope of stopping not only the gambling and cruelty, but also the potential spread of the virus. These events had been linked to local COVID-19 outbreaks, which by then had claimed thousands of lives across the Philippines. It was just as Christian attempted to confiscate a rooster, one of the animal's gaffs, a razor-sharp metal blade strapped tightly to the animal's leg, sliced into his upper thigh, puncturing his femoral artery. This critical blood vessel, once severed, led to rapid and uncontrollable blood loss. Fellow officers on the scene tried urgently to help their wounded lieutenant. They used a cloth in a desperate attempt to create a makeshift tourniquet. But with limited time and supplies, the efforts to stanch the bleeding proved inadequate. In mere minutes, Christian was losing a dangerous amount of blood, and paramedics were called to rush him to the provincial hospital. Despite their best efforts, Christian Bolak was declared dead on arrival. The sharp blade of the rooster had caused fatal trauma, underscoring the severe hazards associated with cockfights, risks that extended far beyond the arena. Edwin Ong Chuan, governor of Northern Samar, voiced his sorrow and frustration, emphasizing the tragic loss of a dedicated officer whose commitment to enforcing health and safety regulations cost him his life. Ong Chuan noted that the team had taken every possible precaution that evening, fully aware of the risks they faced in the raid. "We grieve with our provincial police in the loss of such a committed and selfless officer," Ong Chuan remarked, recognizing Christian's sacrifice in protecting his community. To honor Christian service, the local government offered support to his family, ensuring they were not left to bear their grief alone. His colleagues and community remember Christian Bolak as a brave officer and a selfless protector of his people, a memory that will not soon be forgotten.